Today I want to explain to you the concept of intertextuality. And what better way to do it than with my favourite band, 2000s indie rockers, Bloc Party. Intertextuality was a concept coined in the late 1960s by philosopher and literary critic Julia Kristeva. In Word, Dialogue and Novel, she states that the three coordinates of dialogue are writing subject, addressee, and exterior text. The word status is thus defined horizontally. The word in the text belongs to both the writing subject and addressee, as well as vertically. The word in the text is oriented toward anterior or synchronic literary corpus. This quote is proposing a way of thinking about text on a grid with horizontal and vertical axes, an idea later referred to as intertextual mapping, where you plot visually the influence and influences of a text both through the perspective of the author creating their work and the viewer or reader and the social and historical context in which they perceived it. You can see how the work of Russian philosopher Mikhail Bakhtin, her predecessor, has influenced her here. According to Graham Allen, Bakhtin does not seek to announce the death of the author. The author still stands behind his or her novel, but she or he does not enter into it as an authoritative voice. As a doctoral student in France, Kristeva studied under Roland Barthes, one of the most influential literary theorists of the 20th century and writer of the book The Death of the Author, 1967, in which he argues that the meaning of a text is not determined by the author's intention, but rather by the reader's interpretation. Barthes wrote in his book The Rustle of Language of Kristeva that she changes the place of things. She always destroys the last prejudice, the one you thought you could be reassured by, could take pride in. What she displaces is the already said. What she subverts is authority. One idea that will be useful in our quest to understand Bloc Party is Barthes' idea of how artists create meaning in their texts. Ed White eloquently explains Barthes' point on this in his book How to Read Barthes' Image Music Text. The scripter is never a figure who creates something totally original. Rather, the scripter mixes writings and counters the ones with the others, as a kind of mixer or sampler. The scripter is thus more of a DJ than an oracle. In her 1997 article, Intertextuality, Origins and Development of the Concept, theorist and lecturer Maria Jesus Martinez Alfaro says that there are always other words in a word, other texts in a text. The concept of intertextuality requires, therefore, that we understand texts not as self-contained systems, but as differential and historical, as traces of otherness, since they are shaped by the repetition and transformation of other textual structures. Alfaro, through reading the works of influence in the concept, views intertextuality as an approach to criticism beyond the individual work, in order to consider it in relation to the whole literary system, as well as to culture, history, and society. This is the idea that Kristeva created with her work, what intertextuality means, and how it opens new avenues to understanding your favourite works of art and media. Now let's try and use these ideas to understand the pop cultural lineage of
Bloc Party!
Bloc Party are a British indie rock band formed by singer and rhythm guitarist Kelly Okereke and lead guitarist Russell Lissack in London in 1999 after bumping into each other at Reading Festival and deciding to start a band. Not long after, they recruited bassist and backing vocalist Gordon Mokes and drummer Matt Tong, creating the lineup that would serve them until 2015 after their first 4 albums. An article in The Guardian describes them as having borrowed from the dance punk that was making stars of the Rapture and LCD sound system over in the US, matched the catchiness of their commercially minded peers and extended their reach into other realms, such as house, grime, and R&B. Drawing from a large pool of influences, helped by the recent globalization happening around the turn of the millennium, where, with the help of technological advances, TV channels like MTV, iPods, torrenting sites, all music was more accessible than ever before, and Bloc Party used this to their advantage. They scripted their messages, borrowing from texts that preceded them. Okereke was a fan of hip-hop producer Timbaland, and his omnivorous tastes meant that Bloc Party appealed to the open-minded listener. Whether they were a hardened Gang of Four fan or a desert scarf-wearing, glow-stick-toting underage raver. Bloc Party's website near the start of their career described them. Bloc Party is an autonomous unit of unextraordinary kids reared on pop culture between the years of 1976 and the present day. A bold manifesto that represents this broad concern of culture. They're not only drawing from their own format, music, but from pop culture as a whole. They not only draw inspiration from the pop culture of the past, but of the artists in their scene. In an interview for Pitchfork in 2005, Kelly said, "I really want to propose that Bloc Party is a postmodern band. We're not afraid to take from anywhere. There's too much rock that relies on fetishism or nostalgia for the old ways. That's a real enemy to music. It needs to be constantly looking forward." He went to a Franz Ferdinand gig in 2003 and gave a CD demo of the song She's Hearing Voices to both lead singer Alex Kapranos and BBC Radio 1 DJ Steve Lamacq. Lamacq called it genius when he played it on his show and invited the band in for a live session, cementing the band as the press's new indie darlings. They released their debut album Silent Alarm in 2005 to universal critical acclaim, being voted Album of the Year by NME and reaching third on the UK Albums Chart, selling over 1 million copies worldwide and achieving platinum status by 2008. They instantly broke America, a feat famously difficult for most British outfits, with positive reviews from many transatlantic critics and playing sold-out shows across the US throughout the following year. An article from The Guardian said it best. They pushed beyond the idea of making indie disco music for uni students to sing heights to, and the razor-sharp, stabbing Telecasters on their debut album Silent Alarm felt like a revelation. Bloc Party not only reference other texts in their lyrics, but also sonically and in their branding or image. They obviously drew heavily from the frenetic post-punk rhythms and themes of urban disillusionment of Joy Division, not only taking from the legacy of their sound, but also seemingly nodding to them visually with the monochrome minimalism of Silent Alarm's album cover. They boast many other sonic influences, such as the legendary Pixies, Adamant, New Order, and Placebo. Placebo also had Russell Lazak of Bloc Party remix their song Because I Want You. They even reference literature in several songs, most likely all thanks to Kelly's English literature undergraduate studies at King's College London. In Song for Clay, Disappear Here, he references very explicitly Bret Easton Ellis's debut novel Less Than Zero, 1985, in which a privileged and disaffected university student goes home to LA for winter break. He unites with his wealthy but emotionally hollow group of friends and plods through a vacuous, drug-fueled existence of partying and empty conversations. The main character, Clay, after which the song was named, sees a billboard whilst driving in LA that says "Disappear Here." He says in the book, "I stop once I see a billboard that I don't remember seeing and I look up at it. All it says is disappear here. And even though it's probably just an ad for some resort, it still freaks me out a little, and I step on the gas really hard, and the car screeches as I leave the light." He is aware that in coming home, he is entering a space of emptiness and dark, a place where a lot happens, but the experience of its inhabitants is still dull and lacking in meaning. In an introduction to the most recent edition of the book, Otessa Moshfegh writes that nothingness seems central to the meaningless luxuries and woes of the youth generation in the 80s. And Okereke sees this depiction of 1980s Los Angeles as a mirror to the mood he feels encompasses the lifestyle of him and his peers in London in the 2000s. He says, "I never felt happy getting off my face. I've never felt it was a real experience. If anything, it's about blanking something out. I wanted this record to portray that. This real sense of disgust at the modern experience."
East London is a vampire, it sucks the joy right out of me.
He is using the book's message and the wider messaging of other depictions to script his own message in the song. As Barthes describes, is the process of the artistic creation of texts. They proved Barthes right in dispelling the popular myth that mainstream texts can't be successful or good without being totally isolated in their originality. Popular texts are in fact successful for their use of diverse references, forged by the scripter, in this case Bloc Party, the writers, to weave an intertextual tapestry of meanings, with the messaging audiences already understand, the literary or musical canon. No. The song Hunting for Witches was written just after the London bombings in 2005, a terrorist attack carried out by members of the Islamist militant group Al-Qaeda, in which 4 suicide bombers with rucksacks full of explosives attacked central London, killing 52 people and injuring hundreds more. It was the worst single terrorist atrocity on British soil. Kelly says in an interview for Billboard, "I guess the point about the song for me is post-September 11th, the media has really traded on fear and controlling people." Amidst a political climate rocked by 9/11 across the pond, and terrorism seemingly spreading to Britain too, people were scared that the tragedy of these attacks would worsen. This fear in the air of the country led both the media and public, especially white Brits, to become suspicious of immigrants in the UK, as they associated terrorists with the Middle East and Al-Qaeda. Tony Blair had followed George W. Bush in the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11 a few years prior, further reifying the people's unfounded prejudice. The media at the time also reflected and spurred this on, with racial headlines and fear-mongering rhetoric. Kelly told music magazine DMY that after the 7th of July bombings, the London bombings, I was amazed at the tone of all the mainstream press, how they were whipping people up into this xenophobic frenzy towards Muslims. Race is only discussed when there's a negative connotation. That's what Hunting for Witches is about. Media scholar John Fiske argues that popular culture contains, while attempting to repress them, voices that contradict the ones it prefers. Bloc Party and Hunting for Witches are a great example of a radical voice opposing the dominant culture. Understanding the zeitgeist and historical events around the creation of the text are essential to understanding what influenced the author, or writing subject, as Christeva would call it, but also to understanding how a modern listeners, or addressees, own historical context would shape their interpretation of the text. A listener now might hear Hunting for Witches and think of Trump instead of Bush, Starmer instead of Blair, and the issue of online alt-right media becoming mainstream instead of headlines in newspapers. As Alfaro says, we must consider texts in relation to the culture, history, and society of both the author and addressee in order to map them intertextually, as Christeva's framework argues. Bloc Party's influence extends far beyond their own discography, resonating deeply with the new generation of artists and creators across music, film, television, and gaming. Their distinct sound and emotional urgency have become a key intertextual reference point, shaping the creative output of bands like Paramore, inspiring solo artists like Kenny Hoopla, and appearing in soundtracks across a range of popular media. Hayley Williams, lead vocalist of enduring emo-turned-pop band Paramore, said on her BBC Sounds podcast Everything is Emo.
Bloc Party from day one was the #1 reference because it was like there was such an urgency to their sound that was different from the fast punk or the pop punk or the like loud wall of sound emo bands that were happening in the early 2000s. They had their own thing, and it was so unique and so dynamic, and it really stuck with us.
In an article in The Guardian on the enduring genius of Bloc Party, music journalist Janessa Williams said that although Bloc Party may have faded from mainstream view in the mid-2010s, in 2022 a generation of new alternative artists are tapping into the indie disco heroes' legacy. You can hear A Weekend in the City in the math rock flourishes of Foals, Everything's intricate wordplay, and the Maccabees' poignant sentimentality. A big comparison being made as well is Bloc Party's influence on newcomer Kenny Hoopla, who decided to pursue music seriously after discovering their work on a late-night YouTube binge. Bloc Party's widespread presence across media and their influence on a new generation of artists exemplifies Christeva's theory of intertextuality, where every text is a mosaic of quotations, shaped by the cultural and artistic works that precede it. Their music does not exist in isolation, but is constantly reinterpreted. As Roland Barthes argues in The Death of the Author, meaning is not fixed by the creator, but produced by the audience. and Bloc Party's legacy lives on through the meanings new listeners and artists inscribe into their work. In this way, their sound becomes not just a product of early 2000s indie, but an evolving cultural reference, endlessly recontextualized to suit the contemporary plights of young people existing in their own eras. Bloc Party's artistry exemplifies Julia Kristeva's theory of intertextuality, acting as a cultural mosaic that draws from music, literature, and the socio-political climate of the world in which they lived. Their lyrical and sonic references, from Bret Easton Ellis to Joy Division, reveal them not as artists creating completely original work in a vacuum, but as scripters in Roland Barthes' terms, weaving inherited meanings into new forms. As cultural texts, their songs both reflect and critique the zeitgeist of their time, yet their legacy also lies in how audiences and artists like Paramore and Kenny Hoopla continually reinterpret their work through the lens of their own cultural context. As Kristeva proposes, meaning is never fixed. It is dialogic, shaped across time by listeners. Bloc Party's enduring relevance lies in their openness to this intertextual reimagination. I hope you came to understand Kristeva's theory of intertextuality through our exploration of Bloc Party's early discography, and that you are now cursed like me to understand the impossibility of living outside the infinite text.